Okay, welcome back, Inebri-arts. This is Andy of the Inebri-art podcast. I'm once again recording from my house due to social distancing issues. But because of that, we're able to reach out to people we wouldn't normally get to speak to. And today I am speaking with Michael Grecco. Did I get that pronunciation right?
You did, Andy. You did. Thank you very much.
Usually not my forte, but happens once in a while. So thanks for joining us. How have you been handling the whole lockdown, shelter in place, whatever your preference?
You know, it's been a weird time because I've had walking pneumonia. I had bronchitis with two very difficult bacteria to get rid of. So it's kind of been cool because it's like a good time to be home and a good time to recover, right? If everyone else is buzzing around you, you'd feel like you're missing out or not getting stuff done. So I've been able to work from home and, take it easy, and that's been good. And I'm on the mend now, so it's really good.
That's excellent. So speaking of working from home, you are a photographer, and you have worked with some amazing names. I was looking at your website. Obviously, you don't start off at the top. So, where did you get your start?
Well, I'm sure your audience, I don't know how much of a local audience you have, but Massachusetts was my old stomping ground.
Yeah, you went to a college out here, right?
BU, yes. I went to Boston University. I grew up in New York, and when I left high school, my parents moved to Connecticut, and I moved away to Boston and I didn't leave for 10 years. So,
okay. So you're familiar with the area.
And then I worked for the Boston Herald. So I started in school, and I grew up in New York, so I wanted to be in a city. Boston's a little town compared to New York, but it was a nice little town.
Yeah.
And I went to school, and then I started interning for the Associated Press and doing photojournalism. So I did that during the day, and I was a club kid at night in Boston, and I actually have a new book coming out in October, at the end of October, called Punk, Post-Punk, and New Wave. It's about it's all the pictures I shot at night for the 10 years I was there. So I would go out all the time. Yeah, it's been pretty fun to do. So
what clubs did you hit up down here, Middle East?
It's shot at the Paradise, the Orpheum, the Channel, the book is actually broken up into sections of what clubs. So everything from Jonathan Swift's to the Rat to everything. So,
it's really neat.
It'll be fun.
I never spent as much time as I always wanted to in Boston, being a suburban kid, but there were some really cool clubs up there to see shows. My favorite, I think, was Axis and Avalon. Those two clubs are right next to each other behind Fenway.
Well, yeah, it was Spit and Metro, and those were the days that I was there, and I was at Spit every night, and there were great shows at Metro and Spit and New Order, and there were it was really a heyday of that music in Boston, because the college radio station sort of helped break that genre of music in the country. Yeah.
Yeah. Boston's always kind of had a good, solid music scene. Going far back. You mentioned Joe Perry being a local guy. So, all the way back then, we had them and, sure, I'm going to draw a blank, but we've always had a really strong music scene.
Well, I probably shouldn't talk out of turn, but I'm sure our audience is going to want to hear. My hair was always cut by this woman, Glenda, who was living with Joe Perry at the time. And I got to know Joe just very casually, and he then did a video called, when Aerosmith had broken up, he then did a video called Black Leather Pants or something like that. And the model in the video was this very known model, hot girl around town, Billy Montgomery. I love Billy.
Yeah.
And rumor has it, Joe flirted with Billy the whole time. And rumor has it that Glenda went back to the house and threw all his stuff out from the second story window out on the street. So
it's a very rock and roll story.
Yeah, and then Glenda wound up getting together with Robert from Till Tuesday, and
Yeah.
all these bands at the time, the like Till Tuesday and Amy Mann, and we'd all hang out at the Rat at the restaurant, the Hoodoo Barbecue. So,
oh, nice. So is that when were you working for the Associated Press then?
Yeah, so I had this sort of dual life. I was a news photographer during the day. I'd shoot Governor Mike Dukakis regularly.
Yeah.
We were on a first name basis. Hi, Mike. Hi, Mike. And I don't let many people call me Mike. So, we were on a first name basis. I was the young kid at the front of the press conference on the floor all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would have this, sort of netherworld drug and rock and roll culture life at night. I would, put on leather jacket and cowboy boots and tight jeans and go out and, be in the clubs every night.
Oh, that's cool. So is that kind of your first foray into photographing celebrities? Because I mean, you've photographed some of the biggest names out there.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I also photographed some celebrities for the Associated Press, like Christy Brinkley at a press conference and things like that were routine for my job with the Associated Press. Doing a portrait of Twiggy when she did prepped her pre-Broadway show in Boston. So I had some experience. But what had happened was I was then offered a job at the Boston Herald from the AP. And I worked at the Herald for about 5 years. And then I had done really, really well on the Carolyn Kennedy wedding and the Maria Shriver wedding in Boston. And People magazine said they would hire me. So that was really the impetus. I decided if I was going to make a career change, I was going to make a major change in general and move from Boston, and I moved to Los Angeles. I figured if I wanted to eventually shoot celebrities, being in a place to shoot celebrities would be the way to go. So,
yeah, generally out here, the biggest celebrities are sports celebrities.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that
is true.
But that is something that you've done and continue to do, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I've shoot people of every ilk, business people, movie stars, television stars, music stars, sports figures, all of it.
And so have you always been into photography? Is that something you found at BU? Like, what was kind of the initial spark that got you into it?
Yeah, I got turned on to it in summer camp. And was like totally turned on to it in summer camp, totally into it. Wound up like picking up a camera and learning the darkroom at 12 or 13. And then I never looked back. I would go to the Greenberg Public Library and steal or lift the Time Life on Photography books, which was at the time, this great series of books to learn about photography. And there were, the great masters and Penn and Avedon and Bruce Davidson and Robert Heineken and Man Ray. And you'd learn about all these great master photographers in the world. And I would sit there at night, under my covers and like, oh, wouldn't this be so cool? Oh my God, what a life this would be. And I thought this was it. And it was it. I had sort of a one-track mind, I guess, in getting there. It was a little bit of a circuitous route because I went from photojournalist to sort of editorial magazine portrait photographer and commercial photographer. But it gave me a different set of experiences that were good.
So you're talking about the dark room and film. Do you still shoot on that, or I'm assuming you've gone digital?
No. I mean, okay. I use a Sony R7, Alpha 7R Mark IV. That camera, like the resolving power and the strength of those lenses and chip, are so far superior to film They're so much sharper than film. It's like, my wife's a photographer and she loves shooting film still. And just the workflow of sending it to a lab and getting it back. And she's enamored with the art of it as a fine art photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of look at it as, it's only a hindrance to an editorial photographer or a commercial photographer who needs to be able to see the shoot as they're shooting, who needs to know that they have the files or what the magazine editor or the advertising agency needs,
Mm-hmm.
like to be able to process it. There are also these filters that we use when we convert our black and white images. There's the software that we use that you can get the film look of years ago.
Yeah.
It's processed right into the file. So I mean, I don't see the need for film anymore. If I'm asked to shoot it, I would.
Yeah, but your preference is to go in digital?
Yeah.
So was that kind of, because to me that I find it interesting when technology kind of makes a big leap like that. You have those people who are resistant to change and those people who adopted early. Were you kind of resistant to it, or did you kind of jump on board as soon as digital kind of struck?
I was a relatively early adapter, and given I had a decently high profile, that like I was sponsored by Kodak, so I was the sponsor of the first medium format single capture, which means it's one shot. Mm-hmm. The very first digital medium format back for a Hasselblad. So I was an early adapter. We were in the mix, working with Apple at the time and working with the software Aperture. We've moved to, which doesn't exist anymore. Working with Adobe now, and working with Kodak, learning about color theory and companies like X-Rite, and learning how to profile your system and your monitors. And it's been a long journey. I mean, it's probably been at least, I don't know, 20 years at this point.
Yeah, and it just gets more and more prominent. I mean, I find from running some pop-up art shows and whatnot that we have more and more and more photography submitted because it's so easy. We hung on a small single artist show that was all shot on her iPhone. Do you think that's a good thing where people can have more exposure and do something creative just off their phone, or do you kind of think it muddies the water between like professional photographers and kind of amateurs?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, for the world, mm-hmm. I guess it's a better thing because there are some people taking amazing pictures that normally wouldn't be able to surmount the technical challenges of film photography. And I mean, remember, I started when you had to focus the camera, expose the film, load it with film. If you were using a flash off camera, you would have to focus with your two fingers and hold the flash. And there were a lot of technical challenges, right? And when I got to the Herald, there were older photographers that were like, kid, I started with a 4x5 speed Graflex and a flash cube. And we would take a picture and we'd have to put the dark slide in and pull the 4x5 holder out, flip it around, slide the 4x5 holder in, pull the dark slide out, wet your fingers, pull the hot flash cube out, put a new one in, and then you can take another picture. You guys now have motor drives. So, everything's relative, but I think for photographers, it's made the market, those of us that went to school, for photography, had the skills, had the technical knowledge, it's made the market really tough because there's a glut of photographers. Everyone thinks they could be a photographer now. So
right. And it's they can slap a filter on through their phone and, kind of touch it up digitally. And it is that kind of double-edged sword where it does open up the field. I was reading up on you. You recently put out a book. Is that correct? So this new book is not the first. Sorry, this new book is not the first book.
I've done 2 lighting books. The first one was a really instructional lighting book, but the second one was really the second lighting book was really it was a combination of a lighting book and portfolio. Like the back end of it were full page pictures. I wanted to show people my work. And then I did a book of portraits of people at the Adult Video Awards called Naked Ambition, an R-rated look at an X-rated industry. So they were pretty GP R-rated portraits of just a bunch of, I don't know, freaks and geeks, like, just, from that industry, like, like people out of a Fellini movie.
Yeah. Was it the like, what made you go in that direction? Was it just kind of that odd type of person that you run into?
I've always been interested in documenting subcultures. Some I've been in, some I haven't been in.
Yeah.
It's always been like my artistic side, right? So, doing the punk subculture was one thing. When I moved to Los Angeles, I would shoot weird cults like the Inebri-art cult, and I did something for a magazine on them. I would shooting, doing portraits of those porn stars in that culture became, just sort of an outreach of what I do artistically.
So what is it about the subculture? And what is it? I'm sorry, Unarian? I've never heard of that.
Oh, Unarius?
Yeah.
Oh, they were a cult in California, where they had a queen and, someone they worshipped, and they were building a space machine. And it led to, their religion sort of led to a plethora of great photography.
Yeah. Was it more just the kind of sideshow fascination and like, these are weird people, or was it to try and kind of like get behind that and see who they really were?
I guess it was more sideshow fascination. To be honest, in that, hey, look, I've studied all these great photographers, and I'm a culmination of all the people I've studied. I've loved the portraits of Richard Avedon, right? Mm-hmm. And I've loved the portraits of Diane Arbus. They happened actually to have been friends. Avedon helped Arbus. So when you combined some lighting prowess with wanting to photograph, those interesting cultures and expose those cultures and have subject matter that people find interesting, but also fascinate you. I guess it comes from me as a kid growing up in a very sheltered, old world Italian home, mm-hmm. and a mother who was very protective, and having my mind blown in so many ways. As I've gotten older, I'm more open, and I'm more willing to not participate, but
I think it's natural that, like, I don't know if you want to call us normal people, but there's plenty of documentaries about Hell's Angels and the Branch Davidian cult, and those things have always, I think, been fascinating to people, to kind of somewhere between that odd cult-like behavior, but also that kind of what draws them so close together.
Yeah, and I have a style where I want to shoot heroic portraits. So I want to document and memorialize that culture in portraiture.
Are there any specific subcultures that you like are on your list of what's next?
Friday, my book closes. Like, literally, we are the pedal to the metal with my retoucher.
So you're not thinking about anything else other than that.
My retoucher. I'm sure, I don't know if our audience members can relate to what it's like to close a book, but I had to write preface, and then I had to have someone write an introduction, and we got what's his name, Fred Snyder from the B-52s to write the forward.
Oh, nice.
And, I had to track all these people down. And we actually had the introduction written by Jim Sullivan, who was the music critic of the Boston Globe, because he was in the trenches with me at the time.
Yeah.
So, then we have 200 images and we have to, just adjust them and burn and dodge them and get the files ready. And, the retoucher's been here for weeks, and then we have to make match prints. And then we look at the layouts and think about switching images. And so I'm in production till Friday. And then I see a page that says TK, which is an old newspaper term. It says index TK, which means someone's got to supply the index to the book.
Oh, by Friday?
So no.
Uh-oh.
I'm sure it's a TK page because they want to finish the layouts, because you can't do an index and then keep switching everything around.
Right.
But
exactly.
I'm sure it won't be over by Friday, is what I'm saying.
So has there been any unique challenges trying to get this book together and be quarantined, or has the internet kind of resolved all those types of things?
Well, I'm lucky enough that my office, I have two offices. I have an office upstairs in my house that I guess was a bedroom for the past tenants. I rent this house. So I have an office upstairs in the main house, and then I converted the garage for the employees. So my retoucher can come over, ride her bike, come over, wear a mask and gloves when we interact, but be in a different building. So it's not only social distancing; we're in completely different buildings. So.
No, it's not. I think that's one of the challenges, is trying to figure out what the new workflow is going to be like. And currently I'm furloughed from my day job, so hopefully once things quiet down, they'll bring us back on. But it's, all the restaurants here trying to figure out what the new life is like. And so there's some real challenges. I
know. What do you do for your day job?
I work in marketing for a stainless steel company.
Nice.
Super exciting. But it got me out of the retail industry, and it's taught me so much stuff that I'm a very learn on the fly kind of guy, and so it really fit me. And I got to travel a little bit. Got out to Vegas a couple times in Florida.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's a great company, and they treat us really well. So no complaints.
I mean, it's interesting times. As my career, as I see the industry of photography changing, I'm looking for business opportunities, and I'm working. I'm shooting less, and I'm traveling more for business, or I'm at home. So being at home, working in the office, the only difference is I'm not traveling. I did 45,000 miles in January and February, and I haven't been on any, and I haven't been on an airplane. One was pleasure. Well, one and a half of those trips was pleasure, but the rest was business. And I haven't been on a trip since in March and April. So
well, I don't think too many people have. I actually was out in Vegas the middle of January. I think it was the middle of January, right when the first, murmurs were coming out about the virus in China. And we were at a trade show, and we were set up, and one whole side of our booth was all these companies from China. So you're just at that point, we had no idea about what exactly was going on. We're like, is this an issue? Should we be worried? So it was very nerve wracking, but it was a good trip. My first trip to Vegas, it snowed. So this one I actually got to enjoy, kind of going out on the strip. And
Vegas is weird because it, in the winter, people don't realize it. Well, I mean, in the winter, people don't realize how cold it gets.
Yeah, it was very cold.
I know.
But yeah, it was the furthest west I've ever been. So hopefully I'll get to travel more once I get back to work, but we'll see.
Got to get you to LA.
Oh, I would love to go to LA. It seems like an interesting place. Not fun for traffic, but haven't gotten there yet. And San Francisco's my other place I want to check out.
Well, my traffic buster is a Ducati motorcycle and a Triumph motorcycle.
Oh, nice. So are you generally, obviously, you're a motorcycle guy?
I'm so into it. I took the Triumph. It's a Bonneville T100, and I totally customized it. And then I got this. I had I don't know if our people in our audience know motorcycles, but I had like this classic Ducati MH900E, which looks like the Batmobile. Oh. And I didn't do anything to it. And some guy pulls in front of me, makes a left without looking. He didn't see me. Ooh. So yeah, it's a track bike. So you lay on your stomach with it, and it's hard to be seen.
Yes.
So I didn't hit him. I've taken some track training classes, and I'm I laid the bike down, but it totaled the bike. Oh. So now I bought what is it?
But did you walk away okay?
No, I didn't break anything, but I definitely had sore ribs and intercostal muscle damage, and it took me a while to heal.
For a motorcycle accident, that's kind of okay.
Yeah, it is. I'm a good rider. I always wear my boots.
Yeah.
I have Kevlar jeans, but I usually wear regular jeans, armored gloves, armored jacket, and a helmet, of course. So,
do they have helmet laws out there in California?
Oh yeah.
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 Have you ever done like? I mean, obviously must have done some, but have you ever done like photo series of motorcycles? Kind of combined your two.
That would be something of interest. I have an idea. That after the punk book, I might do another subculture, and I think that it would be the right thing to do, but I can't give away too much of it.
Right. Yeah. You like to keep your ideas close to the vest kind of thing. Makes sense. So you worked for People Magazine and a newspaper, and through the course of, the times are changing, and those, I don't want to say they're going away. I don't know if magazines and newspaper will ever fully go away, but they're definitely not like they used to be. How have you had to kind of adjust marketing yourself and finding new venues to work in?
Well, I mean, that's the problem. The markets are drying up, and so not only do you have a glut of photographers, you have a loss of need for supply. You have a loss of demand, because the high end advertising jobs that used to be for print and the high end editorial jobs that used to be for print have now gone to social media, and no one wants to pay a lot of money for social media photography. It's used small. It's like there's not an expectation of quality with a social media image that there was with a double page spread in Vanity Fair or Vogue, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
has that kind of homespun feel to it. So if it's not dead on, and kind of okay.
Well, and then keep in mind, at one point, I think the Condé Nast magazines were printing at 600 PPI or DPI, right? Mm-hmm. So if those of our audience that know Photoshop and what PPI is, and it's DPI, it's dots per inch. I mean, their quality was so high that you needed stuff shot on medium format cameras, and everything had to be done right. And if it was out of focus or didn't work, it didn't work. It's like, it didn't hold up on a magazine page. Now anything goes. So, I mean, working on more projects like this will just differentiate me, but I can't rely anymore on strictly the income of photography shoots.
Yeah. Do you look to do more video? I believe, if I remember correctly, you've done some, right?
Well, yeah, I'm working on a documentary series with a partner. Oh, nice. We're in the middle of the pitch on that. I have a couple of businesses that are related to photography that are in development. I've got a couple of things going, which are nice.
And I think that's one of those, the true test of professional and an amateur photographer. Like, amateur photographers are going to be like, oh, I sold this, I sold that. But the professional, I think, is more, this is my job, and if it's not there, I have to somehow make it, work. I have to kind of tweak things and find new avenues, and kind of that entrepreneurial spirit that kind of comes out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like, I've got kids and a wife and a house, and, we have 2 cars. I have 2 motorcycles. It's like, it's... You
don't have to get rid of the motorcycles.
No. So I didn't finish. I replaced one Ducati with another. I bought a GT 1000, which is a cafe racer style where I'm upright more. I convinced my wife it was safer.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just thinking, if, times are tight, if you have a wife, 2 kids, a house, 2 cars, and 2 motorcycles, the motorcycles are going to go first.
Yeah, no one's taken my motorcycles away from me.
Okay, so kids will go. Do your kids show interest in arts or photography?
My middle daughter is an amazing illustrator, Sophia Jane Grecco. She's really a fabulous illustrator. She's just finishing a 5-year BFA program at Cal State Long Beach. I've tried to convince her not to go into the print industry because I think the print industry is dying, and to go into animation, but she'll find her way. She's very smart. She's very strategic. She's
It's funny. I had a similar conversation with my daughter. She just started high school a year ago, and she's going in. It's a trade school, and they have visual communications. And she's like, "Oh, there's a couple different things," and visual communications is more animation, and the other one is more graphic design. She's like, I think I might go graphic design. I'm like, why? And she's like, well, it'll probably be easier to get a job. And I'm like, yeah, but if you want to do animation, it may be more fulfilling to do what you want. And I think the way things are going, it might be easier to find a higher paying job.
I think the motion arts are going to be, more sustainable than the 2-dimensional design arts, for sure. But I think you're right on that. But, everyone has to find their own path. It's like, I can't tell her what to do. She's 23 years old. It's like, she's got to find her own path. So,
yeah, you just kind of make a suggestion and hope they figure it out.
Yeah, that's true.
But, so you have 2 others?
Yes, I have a son and a younger daughter. So,
and are they not into the art field, or?
My son is studying Unreal Engine and visual VR game design. So he is trying to move into the programming and design side of virtual reality. Yeah, but virtual reality gaming.
Oh, okay.
And my younger daughter is into animals, but doesn't like blood. So she doesn't know if she's going to be a veterinarian or a zoologist.
Oh, okay. Wow. She could what is it? Get a tiger zoo. I don't know if you caught Tiger King.
Oh my god! My son.
I'm like embarrassed to say that I watched it, but it seemed like everybody else was.
You know what? My son and I usually have dinner together a couple of nights a week, and we'll watch a show. And I convinced him. I said, "Let's do Tiger King," and let's do Tiger King. And he's like, "All right." So we're at episode 3, and we're like, "What? What? Really? What? What?"
It was just such a train wreck that I hate that kind of TV, but I just couldn't shut it.
Well, so I having done, I did a documentary on the Adult Video Awards called Naked Ambition, an R-rated look at an X-rated industry. It's on Amazon if anyone wants to rent it. It's fun. So having done a documentary, I was sort of explaining to him you know, he's like, how do they track down these people? I said, well, one, you know, and being a journalist for so long, I'm like, one interview leads, you know, gives you leads and clues to the next interview, and you follow the trail down. It's not how they find the people that's so hard. It's how you make sense of all that footage and tell a story out of it. Like, you know, so I said, look, and we're only through episode 3, and we're like, look, episode 3 was about Joe. Episode 1 was about Joe. Episode 2 was about the other guy, Don, I think his name is. And episode 3 is about
Carol.
Carol,
yeah.
You know, so they're setting this up. Look at it. It's like they've profiled the first person, all the characters they're profiling. Like that took, you know, the director and the editor to have to make sense probably of like, you know, 5-year project, you know, could have been 500 hours of footage. I'd be curious to know how much he shot, but that was the real art of it. And they really, you know, as much as it's a little bit like, you know, hard copy itself, like, you know, when they showed the hard copy clips, I was like, yeah, this is a little sensational, just like hard copy. But at the same time, it's really good storytelling. Like, it's really good storytelling. He's done a really good job.
When you shoot a documentary like that, do you go like kind of pre-interview and go, okay, this, you know, Joe is the main character, we're going to tell his story? Or do you kind of shoot all that and then kind of edit the story together, like once you've shot the footage?
You know, that's the $64,000 question when it comes to documentaries. It's like you try to have an outline, and you try to have an idea of what you're going to do, right? What the story is going to be. It's like a theory, and you go out and prove it. But what invariably happens is it goes somewhere else. Like, it completely goes somewhere else. Like, that's what happened with Naked Ambition, with my doc on the Adult Video Awards. I can see that this was a 5-year project for this director and of Tiger Kings, and I can't imagine that he knew what he was going to walk into as it started developing. I think he started doing some, you know, vanilla kind of thing on private zoos. And then he got into murder, deception, you know, husbands disappearing. Like, I just think he stepped into, you know, gold. And when it came to a great story. So.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's when I do these interviews, I don't plan out any questions because I feel like I then start to, you know, I'm less listening to what you're saying and trying to figure out how I'm going to get from question A to question B. And I've had so many interviews that have just kind of technically gone off the rails, but been so much more fascinating because the guest will say something. I was so lucky I got to interview Uli John Roth from the Scorpions.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know, it was like maybe 10 minutes in, kind of just past those feeler out questions. And he was like, isn't this about art? Let's talk about art. And apparently at a early stage in his life, he decided between being a professional fine artist and a professional guitar player. And so it suddenly, you know, veered off and became like almost an art history class. And I was totally blown away. And it was really fascinating just to kind of, you know, because he was really into it because it was questions he doesn't normally get asked because people don't really know that about him.
Right.
So it made for a really great interview. So I kind of like that, feeling people out and kind of finding out what really makes them tick.
Well, as a documentary filmmaker, I think that's the problem with pre-interviewing. You don't want to put someone on camera. I think if your producer asks some cursory questions and tells someone what the interview is going to be like, about, you know, that's one thing. But to actually do a pre-interview on camera, then it's not fresh, it's not spontaneous, it
becomes like a late night talk show where they ask questions so the comedian can work in his, you know, his pre-written jokes and that.
Right. So do they do that on talk shows? Really?
Did I just ruin it for you?
Oh my!
I just, that always bothers me when you like because I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy, and so when I see a stand-up comedian on a, David Letterman or whatever, and David Letterman asks a question that sets up their joke from their special that you've already seen, and you're like, ugh, this is not, like, it doesn't interest me to see that.
Okay, so if you're into stand-up comedy, the one thing I've done, like I'm watching, especially having bronchitis myself and staying in and laying low and relaxing, I've been watching Downton Abbey. I've been catching up to it. It was a good period series, but I loved The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Oh, so many people told me that I should watch that.
You have to watch that. Have to.
Okay. I will definitely put it on the top of my list.
And, like, if you're into comedy,
yeah,
it's great. It's like a Jewish family in New York in the 50s, and their daughter, God forbid, becomes a comedian, and she's friends with Lenny Bruce, and it's
is she
fabulous.
A real person, or is this kind of like historical?
Well, I went and I read about it, and she is a he, and he is the father of, I think it's a husband-wife partnership that produce and write the show and direct the show. And it's the father that was a male comic at the time that talked about the times, and they translated it into what it would be like to be a woman and trying to deal with the changing times of the 50s and be a woman through discrimination. People discriminated against the woman as a stand-up comic, and I think they made it far more interesting than just a story about what it would be like to be a dude in the 50s and 60s as a stand-up comic.
Yeah, it gives it that more, I don't know, that one step harder challenge kind of.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're all like, even the punk book, it's like the cover is Wendy O. Williams. The publisher and I have made sure there are a lot of women in the book to reinforce the fact that there were a lot of women in punk and new wave and post-punk. Like, it's been kind of an interesting, it's been an interesting process. We picked like I said, a picture of a woman. The book leads off with a lot of women. There are a lot of women throughout the book. It's like we're really making a conscious effort to make sure they're represented.
Nice. Was the punk scene then a real diverse? I mean, I'm familiar with Wendy O. Williams and some others, but as far as other minorities, was it a diverse scene at that time?
No, I mean, so there were a fair amount of women. There were the band The Slits. I mean, there was the Boston band Bound and Gagged, and which was all women, and Joan Jett and
the Runaways
the Runaways. There were I'm trying to think of who else. There were a fair amount of women, and really the only African American presence. I know I forget the Germs. There was a great band out of D.C. that I'd never seen and never photographed, but I know that like the ska bands all had African American representation. The Specials, I believe Madness did, but the English Beat's one of my favorite bands. And it had Dave Wakeling, the Caucasian guy, and Rankin Roger, the African, he's not African American because he's British, the African singer, or black British singer. I'm trying to be as politically correct
singer
as possible here. A singer of color, and they were brilliant together, right? They, but it was really only the ska bands, in my experience. Like I said, I think there was a band, the Germs, that was a black punk band. Is it the Germs? I would have to look it up, but I might be wrong. Please, audience, be kind. This is extemporaneous.
There's no show prep on this, so this wouldn't be the first wrong thing they've heard on it. So the more interviews I've done, the broader range and the higher kind of level of celebrity I get to talk to, do you ever get kind of, starstruck, or, have you ever had to shoot someone that you were a huge fan of and that kind of got in the way, or you kind of had to check that? Or?
Well, I mean, you start out nervous and then, and then after a while it becomes routine, right? So, this has happened to me with, shooting celebrities. It's happened to me being a public speaker. I mean, if you start out in a career doing something new, you're on edge because you want to make sure you perform. Mm-hmm. The bigger the shoot, the bigger the celebrity, you're still like thinking about you're performing. You're making sure you're taking good pictures. You're making sure everyone's feeling good about the situation and you, and you're making sure you can control and direct the people around you in the way you need to. So you're performing, but you're not like on edge or intimidated as I did when I started my career. But any big shoot, you got to be awake, man. Like you got to be like, you got to be. There's a certain level of performance to it.
Mm-hmm. And you're kind of responsible for their image. These people have cultured and spent a lot of time working on their image, and if you don't do your job right, you could potentially screw that up.
Yeah, definitely. And it doesn't matter in the end. You're the one that, I've discussed this with others. It doesn't matter what went wrong or what happened. It's like you are the one that they go to because it's your picture. It's like, I mean, you can make excuses, but I hate making excuses. So I have, there's a series I did of Owen Wilson and Ben Stiller, and it was done for a huge feature in Time magazine. But he was at the end of his publicity tour. The two of them were.
Would this have been for around Starsky and Hutch? It
was for Starsky and Hutch. It was for the first one, yeah. So they were at their end of their publicity tour, and Ben was exhausted. He couldn't smile, say a word. He couldn't interact. And Owen just looked at me and said, because I kept trying to like poke and prod him and, right. Hey, like, hey, all right, look this way. Give me a smile. It's like, Owen said, I got this. And he just would whisper in Ben's ear, and Ben would freaking crack up. Like Owen Wilson was my hero that day of mass proportions. Like, and we got it. The magazine wound up using like a series of images of different expressions because we got so many great different expressions. Like they couldn't pick one. So they ran 4 or 6 pictures across a double page spread on the inside of the art section. And it was funny because like a week or two later, I saw that he was shooting in another studio at this big studio complex that doesn't exist anymore called Fifth and Sunset. It was a big thing for these studios. A lot of these Hollywood studios have multiple studios, and you'd see who was shooting next door. And if you were friends with the photographer, you'd say hello. And Owen Wilson was doing something in a studio next door. And I walked in and I just waved to him, and he's like, I'm busy, but I'll come say hello. I'm in, I said something like, in Studio B or whatever. Yeah. So I went to the bathroom. I come back out and I'm doing an ad campaign. And my 2 advertising clients just look at me and go, Owen Wilson's looking for you? Do you know Owen Wilson? Owen Wilson wanted to say hello.
It's very weird when that, like, Inebri-art started just about 10 years ago, and it's really built up a name for itself in Plymouth, and especially down in the tourist area. We work a lot with restaurants and businesses down there. And so it's this weird, like, people are like, oh, you're kind of famous. And I'm like, I'm famous on like 2 streets, and that's it. But like people, one of my favorite stories is at the Mayflower Brewery, and this girl comes over to me and she's like, there's a local chef. He's probably the best chef in town, Jim Casey. And she comes up, she's like, oh my God. She's like, I did a double take. She's like, I thought you were Jim Casey. And I'm like, you just assume I know who that is? And she goes, yeah. I'm like, hang on, let me text him. It's just that kind of, it gets, I've found it gets surreal, and it has to be even more surreal when you get to your level. And, they're like, hey, Owen Wilson was looking for you. And that's like one of those sentences.
Yeah. I mean, that doesn't happen too often. I really, my relationships were built with the magazines that like the work, and I having kids, I was not really one to pal around. There are a couple of celebrities I've been close to over my career, but having kids, I was not one to pal around or hang out or party with a lot of celebrities. I partied with all those rock stars and hung out with them, when I was in the punk scene.
Back in the Boston days?
Yeah, but then I got a job at the Boston Herald, and I had to be in at 10 o'clock, and I worked 8 hours a day, and I couldn't be, drinking all night and doing drugs all night, being up all night with some chick. And like, it's like I couldn't do it. And I was so interested. I thought it was such a status thing to get a full-time job with a newspaper that I really had to say, what do you want? What's your priority? To be a club kid or to accept this full-time job?
I think that speaks more, to that work ethic, and you get the same thing with bands. It's like, you get these bands that kind of come and go real fast, and it's like, did they get burnt out? Did they not have that work ethic? The people who have chosen to make it their career. I mean, I know bands that are local bands here that are, starting to tour and whatnot, and it's, they like that party lifestyle to a certain extent, but when push comes to shove, they buckle down and they get the work done and they show up on time, and
right.
I think that's a difference. But I want to say again, thanks for taking the time out. I mean, your book's coming to a close on Friday, and you still took the time out to talk to us. That's awesome. I really appreciate that.
I am sweating my retoucher down in the other building. She's the one sweating right now. Oh, okay. My great team. So
that's awesome. Where can our listeners go to see your work or purchase your book? I'm not gonna. It was a very long title. I'm not gonna try to rack my memory for it. And when does the new book come out?
The first coffee table book, strictly coffee table book, is Naked Ambition: An R-rated look at an X-rated industry. Then there's the lighting book. Oh, man, I don't even remember the name of my own book. The Art of Portrait Photography. And all right, skip that one because I'm getting two books mixed up. The new one is called Punk, Post-Punk, New Wave. It's out in October with Abrams Publishing. It's a major release. It'll be everywhere. And I'm
sure that if they look up Michael Grecco on Amazon, they can find all your.
Yeah, and go to my website if you want to see pictures. It's michaelgrecco.com. Grecco is with two C's, Grecco. The fun thing is the movie on Amazon too. It's on Roku. It's the Naked Ambition, an R-rated look at an X-rated industry documentary. But I think that in our time of coronavirus, our wonderful audience would love to have something fun to watch.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'll have to check out along with The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Yes.
It's now been pushed to the top of my list. But again, thanks, man. I really appreciate you giving us the time. I feel like we just scratched the surface. This was really fascinating.
Well, let's do it again when the book comes out, and the book centers around Boston. So let's put it in your calendar and reach out to me in September, and we'll get this scheduled for the release of the book.
Oh, absolutely, that'd be great.
I'll get you an advance copy or a PDF so you can see it, and we'll have lots of Boston stuff to talk about.
Nice. That sounds fantastic. Again, Michael, thank you so much, and thank you to our listeners.
All right, take care.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. You can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art, except for Instagram, we're at Inebri-art6. You can email us with your questions, complaints, and whatnot at Inebri-art@yahoo.com. And if you're looking for more podcasts, you can check out the other podcasts on our network, Retro Redoctopus, America's Hometown Horror, and, of course, Bar Talk, Old Colony, and Inebri-art Podcast, the original. So check those out and subscribe and comment so we can reach more people, and thanks for listening.